From vaudeville to the silver screen to the small screen, the Marx Brothers made an impact wherever people found them. Now, Tom Fox and Mike Volkov bring them into the boardroom to help explain and explore the sometimes chaotic world of governance, risk management, ethics, and compliance. This is Why a Duck? Into the Compliance Soup, which is part of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to Why a Duck? In this episode, we dispense with the discussion of a Marx Brothers movie as we wanted to provide hot takes on the Ericsson FCPA enforcement action, which was announced late Friday, December 6th. So, no movie discussion on this one, but we will be back with another movie in our next episode of Why a Duck. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Mike Volkov for another episode. On Friday, about 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, we had an announcement of a stunning FCPA enforcement action involving the Swedish telecom company Ericsson. So Mike and I wanted to get on and try to do a quick analysis of the case. First of all, because whenever you have a $1 billion FCPA settlement, it's news and noteworthy. But there was a lot in there to digest. So Mike, first of all, welcome back. And why don't you set up the Ericsson fact pattern for us?
Let's talk about the case. Ericsson pays $1 billion, B with a billion, not million, B with a billion, for FCPA violations. They had reserved, I think, Tom, at one point, I think it was $1.2 billion. So they entered into settlement agreements with DOJ and the SEC. They paid a criminal penalty of $520 million and $540 million to the SEC for disgorgement and interest. And then an Ericsson subsidiary in Egypt entered a guilty plea to an FCPA conspiracy count. The parent company Ericsson's parent company entered into a 3-year deferred prosecution agreement, which also included the requirement to retain an independent monitor. Tom and I have not been contacted, just in case anybody's worried, that we're available to be the independent monitor.
We're available.
So I don't want to go, just to summarize, though, the bribery conduct, obviously, this is one of those pervasive and systemic cases, and they occur infrequently. And I think it occurred over a 17-year period. And then let's look just quickly, Tom, just to summarize on how the FCPA corporate enforcement policy was applied. Ericsson did not receive voluntary disclosure credit. There were serious violations because they involved some senior executives and occurred in at least 5 countries. They received only partial credit for its cooperation and remediation because it failed to disclose, and I'd love to know the backstory on this, 2 significant matters during the investigation. They produced certain materials in an untimely manner and failed to take appropriate disciplinary actions with regard to certain executives and employees. While also doing all the other cooperation requirements things. Their compliance program was inadequate at the time the violations occurred, and they're currently implementing enhanced controls to improve its compliance program. I got the sense that they moved kind of slowly here. They moved slowly in terms of remediating their compliance program. They moved slowly with regard to the cooperation. And who knows the backstory on this, but based upon all of that, they only got a 15% reduction from the bottom of the applicable sentencing guidelines. My feeling is that had they really done a slam-bam job and really committed to change, I'll bet you, Tom, they could have knocked off $200 million off of this settlement. But it seems to me like they dragged their feet a lot. Their compliance program was inadequate, but they didn't really seem to be as committed, and for that, they get a 3-year monitor. So that's sort of the outline of the case. look, it's a huge case. It's been waiting for a long time to get resolved, and we can go over sort of some of the lessons learned and some of the conduct, but this is a big deal. This is what DOJ is there for, is to handle these big cases, and they did it looks like a great job, a lot of work from the prosecutor's side.
Well, Mike, I'd like to discuss three themes that I saw in this case, and then maybe get your comment on them, and then some themes that you might have seen. The first theme for me was a lot of the original publicity or PR around this case was 16, 17-year bribery schemes, i.e. 2000 to 2016. But what struck me, one of the key things that struck me when I read the settlement documents was that most of the conduct was 2010 to 2016, and then even more refined, 2013 to 2016. This is not a mid-2000s FCPA case. This is not 15 years ago or 20 years ago. This is relatively recently that this company was engaging in this action, and they continued to engage in this action well beyond the time when they should have known better. So I guess part of my surprise, part of my key lesson is I was surprised that as late as 2016, Ericsson was paying millions of dollars in bribes. And that means there are probably other companies out there that were doing the same thing. The second thing was the almost all of the bribes paid were through third parties, whether they were sham third parties, whether they were approved third parties, whether they were sub-agents of third parties. The clear bribery scheme favored by Ericsson was third parties. And it just reminds us once again that not only are third parties the highest risk for bribery and corruption, but that's the highest use by companies to hide bribe payments is through third parties. And that's why you have to scrub those entities as thoroughly as you can and manage those relationships after they've gone through due diligence, because that's where the government's going to look first. So even in 2019, the government, I think, is still going to focus on third parties, and they're going to want to look at your third-party controls, and then they're going to ask you, have you investigated your third parties? So those were kind of points 1 and 2. And then the third point was really your discussion of the factors in the corporate enforcement policy of the lack of cooperation, of the lack of thoroughness in the report. Obviously, they didn't self-disclose, yet they ran bribe payments through the U.S. banking system. So there's clear jurisdiction. This is not a situation where someone could claim, well, we were outside the United States, we had no idea, we're not a U.S. company, blah, 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 blah. No, they were running payments through the U.S. banking system. Clear jurisdiction, clear knowledge there was U.S. jurisdiction, yet senior executives signing off on these bribery schemes. And I think there are some very, because of all of those factors that you detailed, leading to only a 15% discount, we have $1 billion settlement. And as you said, billion with a B. And it's, I guess, stunning to me in 2019, we can still have, in this year, we've had $2 billion settlements, or I guess last year we had Petrobras, and this year, this case. So we're still getting these massive settlements for conduct that's just a couple of years old.
That struck me as well, that a lot of this was occurring in the late teens. And you would think that given the environment these days, that nobody can build the cases or build a bribery scheme like that without, running into problems. I'll tell you you made a really good point, Tom, on the third parties. And to me, what's really amazing is that they built like a structural bribery system with the aid of insiders, employees and executives. And they built it to the point where they could make sure they can circumvent the due diligence process that the corporate headquarters appears to have had. And they built it through subagents, business consultants, and using, designating one party that can get through the due diligence process, and then making that person spread out a slush fund out there into the use by subagents and sub-consultants. And particularly if you read the China facts, I mean, paying millions and millions of dollars. It was clear they couldn't even calculate all the millions. They just said tens of millions of dollars of bribes. And it was going out through this network of just, slush fund operators and then a network of subagents and sub-consultants. Here, lo and behold, what a surprise, travel and hospitality, sending, people, state-owned telecom companies, officials, and their family members to all these various places. So I always loved, there was one example of a 16-day cruise where they had 2 hours of, product discussion. And that's even laughable to try to say that meets, some requirement for, hey, this was really a product demonstration type of thing. One other point, though, taking a step back, Tom, and you being from, your Houston base there, I hate to tell you, but, I always said the oil and gas industry was the one that's gotten pummeled and developed, some of the best programs. And I think that's true, given Houston and, all the people that work there. And we know what a great compliance community you have there. And oil and gas came by it dishonestly, but years ago, as I always say. But but they learned their lesson. I mean, give them credit. I mean, they did put in a lot of great programs. They are innovative compliance people in that industry. But I think right now we're seeing the resurgence of telecom, the telecom industry. Let's look at some of the recent settlements. We have this one. We had the MTS one, the Russian one. Also, cell phone companies interacting with state-owned telecom companies. Go back to even Haiti Telecom, but then go back to Vimpelcom, and go back to telecom. Obviously, because it's telecom is regulated, and there's usually a state-owned entity. But I think telecom is giving you guys in the oil and gas industry a little bit of a run for your money as to who is the bad person on the block. And this is another example of that to me. I mean, they're going around bribing to get modernization contracts for cell systems, which have to be, I guess, they're putting in 5G, right? And right. The 5G industry, this is a huge global movement right now and a huge global issue that the United States is pushing as well. But look who's right there to engage in this, and now in this bribery scheme. And then going along with it is, what happened to all the Sweden and, other companies that are so low on the corruption scale? And yet we see Vimpelcom, we see Ericsson, we're seeing some big settlements. I mean, we obviously, Brazil has given its pound of flesh, but now we're seeing, telecom companies associated from the Nordic, countries that are supposed to be well behaved in terms of corruption. We had the Danske Bank, we had a lot of money laundering type controversies. We have a lot of banking controversies in that region as well. So maybe this is just a reminder that, you may think you're in the clear when you're dealing with certain countries in certain cultures, but don't kid yourself. I mean, Ericsson was out there in a pretty pervasive and systematic way engaging in bribery for years as part of like a business plan almost.
So this ends, and I guess the Vimpelcom was settled in 2015, I believe.
Right.
So we had Ericsson engaging in bribery and corruption even after the Vimpelcom settlement. And you might have thought they'd gotten the message that you just articulated about telecom companies. Apparently, they didn't get that memo. But we had Vimpelcom, we had Telia, we had MTS.
Oh, Telia. I forgot about that, yeah.
Yeah, so this makes a quadruple bookend that probably will continue. Quintet, if you want to go back to Haitian Telecom, There was one other point I wanted to raise, or lessons learned, Mike, that I didn't in my initial presentation, which is that once you pay a bribe, it never stops. People having their hands out never stops. And that in this enforcement action involved a country, Djibouti, which actually I had to go look up on a map. It's on the Horn of Africa. And in that, the fact pattern of that case, it was clear that representatives of the government, although the bribes paid were only $2.1 million, they continued to come back with their hand out, wanting more money. And once you make it an illegal act, they've got you. You can't say no. You can't stop. You can't run because you can't complain to anyone. You can't run to the authorities and saying they're blackmailing me more because you've actually paid the money. It wasn't blackmail. It was just simply that you violated the law, and now they've got you. We saw that in the Technique FMC enforcement action, where FMC found itself continually having to pay Iraqi officials even after they thought they had a deal. Right. No honor among thieves. Right. So, once you engage in one illegal act, you're literally setting yourself up to have to continue to pay bribes, not only to those government officials, but clearly the word's going to get out that you can be extorted or you can be a bribe payer, and you're going to have to do so going forward.
I would urge people to read the fact pattern in that, because they started to get, emails demanding the payment. What was weird about that also was they awarded the contract first, and then they were paying the bribe. And so these guys came after them pretty aggressively about, hey, pay us the bribe, where's our money? And, and it was at a very high level within the Djibouti government, which I thought was interesting. But that just sort of taking that point let me give you just an anecdote on a small scale from a client. They were operating in Brazil, and they started to get people coming around and demanding bribes for everything, labor, health, safety, everything. And they took their policy, which was, we don't pay any bribes, and they just refused to do it. Now, they got hit a few times with regulatory, type of violations, but by saying no and sticking to it, and I don't want to go back to the Nancy Reagan days, but saying no, the problem went away. They stopped coming, and they stopped demanding bribes. And even on a small scale, your point is really well taken. If you start to pay, then they're just going to keep coming, and the demands will keep going. Once you get the reputation that you don't pay, people do better. And I know it sounds corny, but really it's kind of like a tone that you set in your interactions, and your reputation then spreads within, let's say, a corrupt regulatory system in Brazil, where this occurred. And so it's a good point for everybody to remember that. That's why we always argue we don't pay bribes anywhere, anytime to anybody, whether you're government or not. We just don't do it.
I guess Brian Spinskowski foreshadowed this settlement at his ACI remarks last week. Ericsson had reserved $1.2 million for this, and when a company publicly announces a reserve, I think that's a pretty good sign that a settlement is at least in the offing. They have brought in a new chief compliance officer, hired the chief compliance officer from Billfinger, who gotten that company through its monitorship. So they have a new compliance team at the top with experience in dealing with the monitor. So I think the company is making the right steps. But $1 billion is still $1 billion. We don't know what their pre-settlement investigative costs were, but they're going to have significant post-settlement costs as well. And the just totaling up the amount of bribes paid, it is just north of, I think, about $100 million. So they paid and paid and paid for this. So lots of lessons. We're going to both blog on this on the upcoming week. So I hope our listeners will check out our blog post to see what further explanation of some of the lessons learned from this case. Every year, Mike, I don't think things can get any bigger, and guess what? They do.
I know. And you know what? We may be seeing, this may be the beginning of a few more settlements that may get announced, because we always see a little bit of a rush at the end of the year, Tom. So we'll see.
All right, till next time.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this special episode of Why a Duck, where we focused on the Ericsson FCPA enforcement action. Both Mike and I are going to be blogging about this case over the next week, so check out our blog sites. Mine is the FCPA Compliance and Ethics blog. Mike is, of course, Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. Why a Duck is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Please join us for our year-end wrap-up episode.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Why a Duck. Make sure to subscribe, and if you enjoyed the episode, leave a review.